The inflammatory breakfast trinity represents a devastating convergence of three specific food categories that, when consumed together during morning meals, create a synergistic inflammatory response with particularly harmful effects on joint health in seniors. This trinity consists of high fructose sugars, refined carbohydrates, and processed meats, foods that individually promote inflammation but become exponentially more destructive when combined. The first component encompasses high fructose sugars and artificial sweeteners found in fruit juices, flavored coffee creamers, sweetened yogurts, and breakfast syrups. These rapidly absorbed sugars trigger dramatic blood glucose spikes while simultaneously elevating uric acid levels and promoting the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. These AGEs literally bind to proteins in joint cartilage, creating permanent structural changes that reduce flexibility and increase stiffness throughout the day. The second element involves refined carbohydrates, including white bread, bagels, pastries, muffins, and processed breakfast cereals. Stripped of their protective fiber and antioxidants during processing, these foods convert rapidly to glucose, amplifying the inflammatory cascade initiated by the sugars. This glucose surge generates additional AGEs while triggering the release of inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha that directly target joint tissues. The third component consists of processed breakfast meats, such as bacon, sausage, and deli ham. These products contribute high sodium levels that increase fluid retention around joints, nitrites that form inflammatory compounds when heated, and excess omega-6 fatty acids that shift the body's prostaglandin production toward pro-inflammatory pathways. The synergistic nature of this combination creates a multiplicative rather than additive effect. The rapid sugar absorption primes inflammatory pathways, refined carbohydrates sustain and amplify the response, while processed meats provide the chemical messengers that transform temporary inflammation into sustained joint damage. For seniors, age-related declines in antioxidant capacity and increased baseline inflammation levels make this morning combination particularly devastating to joint health. The scientific mechanisms underlying joint destruction from inflammatory breakfast foods operate through precisely orchestrated biochemical cascades that begin within minutes of consumption and create sustained damage to cartilage, synovial tissue, and joint structures. These mechanisms involve multiple interconnected pathways that transform seemingly innocent morning meals into potent drivers of chronic joint inflammation and progressive tissue degradation. The destruction begins immediately when high fructose sugars enter the bloodstream, bypassing normal glucose regulatory mechanisms and driving rapid hepatic ATP turnover. This process generates adenosine monophosphate, AMP, that degrades quickly to uric acid, with serum levels rising within 30 minutes of consumption. Even when uric acid concentrations remain below crystal formation thresholds, soluble urate acts as a danger signal, activating the NLRP3 inflammasome complex in immune cells throughout joint tissues. This activation triggers the release of interleukin-1 beta, IL-1 beta, a master inflammatory cytokine that directly stimulates synovial inflammation and cartilage degradation. Simultaneously, the glucose surge from fructose metabolism accelerates the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs, through non-enzymatic Maillard reactions between sugars and proteins. These AGEs cross-link irreversibly with collagen and elastin fibers in joint cartilage, fundamentally altering their molecular structure and reducing tissue flexibility and hydration capacity. Refined flour products create dramatic postprandial glucose spikes that amplify the inflammatory cascade through multiple pathways. The rapid glucose elevation activates nuclear factor kappa B, NF-kappa B signaling, a master regulator of inflammatory gene expression that increases production of pro-inflammatory cytokines including interleukin-6, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha. This NF-kappa B activation also triggers increased synthesis of matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs, particularly MMP1, MMP3, and MMP13, along with Adam's 5 enzymes that directly degrade collagen, proteoglycans, and other essential cartilage matrix components. The glucose volatility generates severe oxidative stress through mitochondrial superoxide overproduction and NADPH oxidase activation, creating reactive oxygen species that overwhelm cellular antioxidant defenses and directly damage chondrocytes, the specialized cells responsible for cartilage maintenance and repair. This oxidative environment also reduces nitric oxide bioavailability, impairing subchondral bone microcirculation and compromising nutrient delivery to joint tissues. Processed breakfast meats introduce multiple additional pro-inflammatory mechanisms that synergize with sugar and refined carbohydrate effects. The high sodium content promotes fluid retention and synovial swelling, increasing intra-articular pressure and morning stiffness while sensitizing pain receptors. Nitrites and nitrates used as preservatives undergo transformation during high heat cooking into nitroso compounds and heterocyclic amines, HCAs, which bind to aryl hydrocarbon receptors and activate additional inflammatory cascades. These cooking processes also generate advanced lipoxidation end products that parallel AG formation but target lipid structures, creating additional cross-linking and oxidative damage. The heme iron present in processed meats catalyzes free radical formation through Fenton reactions, amplifying oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation throughout joint tissues. Furthermore, these meats typically contain high levels of arachidonic acid and omega-6 fatty acids, which shift eicosanoid metabolism toward production of pro-inflammatory prostaglandins, particularly PGE2 and leukotrienes, while depleting anti-inflammatory omega-3 derived resolvins and protectins. The combined consumption of these 3 food categories creates a multiplicative rather than additive inflammatory effect. Fructose-driven uric acid elevation primes the inflammasome system, making immune cells hyperresponsive to subsequent inflammatory signals. Glucose-derived AGEs bind to receptor for advanced glycation end products on chondrocytes and synovial cells, locking in sustained NF-kappa B activation and maintaining elevated cytokine production for hours after consumption. The oxidative stress from refined carbohydrates accelerates both AG and ALE formation, while the arachidonic acid from processed meats provides substrate for sustained prostaglandin synthesis. This creates a prolonged window of elevated inflammatory mediators that peaks precisely when morning joints are most vulnerable due to overnight cartilage dehydration, reduced synovial fluid turnover, and naturally occurring circadian variations in anti-inflammatory hormone levels. Age-related vulnerability factors create a cascade of physiological changes that transform seniors into particularly susceptible targets for the inflammatory effects of problematic breakfast foods. These changes operate across multiple biological systems simultaneously, fundamentally altering how the aging body processes, responds to, and recovers from dietary inflammatory triggers. Understanding these vulnerability factors reveals why the same breakfast combination that might cause minor inflammation in a younger person can trigger significant and prolonged joint damage in seniors. The aging process fundamentally compromises cellular defense mechanisms at the most basic level. Chondrocytes, the specialized cells responsible for maintaining and repairing cartilage, undergo progressive deterioration through a process called cellular senescence. These senescent cells accumulate within joint tissues and adopt what scientists call the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, SASP, continuously releasing pro-inflammatory factors including interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and matrix-degrading enzymes. This creates a baseline inflammatory environment even before any dietary triggers are introduced. Simultaneously, mitochondrial function, the cellular powerhouses responsible for energy production, declines significantly with age. These compromised mitochondria not only produce less energy for cellular repair processes, but also generate increased reactive oxygen species, creating internal oxidative stress that makes cells more vulnerable to additional inflammatory damage from dietary sources. The body's natural antioxidant defense systems undergo dramatic deterioration with aging, leaving seniors defenseless against dietary inflammatory compounds. Glutathione levels, often called the master cellular antioxidant, decrease by approximately 40% between ages 40 and 80. Critical antioxidant enzymes, including superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione peroxidase, become significantly less efficient, reducing the body's ability to neutralize reactive oxygen species generated by high glucose meals and processed foods. The synthesis of endogenous antioxidants like coenzyme Q10 and alpha-lipoic acid also decreases substantially. This multi-layered decline means that oxidative stress from inflammatory breakfast foods persists longer and inflicts greater damage to joint tissues, as the cellular cleanup system simply cannot keep pace with the inflammatory assault. Age-related changes in digestive function create additional pathways for inflammatory foods to cause systemic damage. Stomach acid production decreases by up to 30% in individuals over 65, reducing the body's ability to properly break down proteins from processed meats and potentially allowing larger inflammatory peptides to enter circulation intact. Pancreatic enzyme production, particularly amylase for carbohydrate digestion and lipase for fat processing, declines progressively with age. This incomplete digestion leads to fermentation of undigested food particles in the gut, producing additional inflammatory compounds and bacterial endotoxins. The intestinal barrier also becomes more permeable with aging, a condition known as leaky gut, which allows inflammatory food components and bacterial byproducts to cross more readily into systemic circulation, where they can directly impact joint health. Insulin resistance becomes increasingly prevalent with aging, affecting approximately 40% of individuals over 65 and fundamentally altering how the body processes carbohydrates from breakfast foods. This metabolic dysfunction means that glucose spikes from refined breakfast foods create more dramatic, prolonged, and inflammatory responses compared to younger individuals with intact insulin sensitivity. The impaired glucose metabolism accelerates the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs, as elevated blood glucose levels persist longer and have extended opportunity to react with joint proteins. Age-related changes in fat distribution and adipose tissue function compound these problems by increasing production of inflammatory adipokines like leptin and resistin, while decreasing protective adiponectin levels, creating a systemic pro-inflammatory metabolic environment. The physical architecture of joints undergoes significant deterioration with aging that amplifies vulnerability to inflammatory damage. Cartilage naturally thins and loses its proteoglycan content, the molecules responsible for water retention and shock absorption, making it less resilient and more susceptible to inflammatory degradation. The cartilage matrix itself becomes more cross-linked and brittle, reducing its ability to withstand mechanical stress and chemical damage. Synovial fluid production decreases while its composition changes, reducing both lubrication and nutrient transport to cartilage tissues. Hyaluronan concentration and molecular weight in synovial fluid often decline, diminishing the joint's natural lubrication system. These structural changes mean that inflammatory compounds from dietary sources encounter joint tissues that are already compromised and operating with reduced repair capacity. The aging immune system undergoes a paradoxical transformation called immunosenescence, where it becomes simultaneously less effective at resolving inflammation and more prone to chronic inflammatory activation. This process, often termed inflammaging, creates a baseline state of low-grade systemic inflammation that primes the body for exaggerated responses to dietary triggers. T-regulatory cells that normally suppress excessive inflammatory responses become less functional with age, while pro-inflammatory immune cells become hyperresponsive to stimuli. The result is that inflammatory cascades initiated by problematic breakfast foods are more likely to become chronic and less likely to resolve naturally through normal immune regulation mechanisms. Age-related decline in kidney function, combined with common use of diuretic medications for blood pressure management, significantly reduces uric acid excretion capacity. This makes seniors particularly vulnerable to fructose-rich beverages that rapidly elevate uric acid levels and trigger inflammatory responses. Hormonal changes further compound vulnerability, as declining estrogen and testosterone levels reduce natural anti-inflammatory signaling and cartilage maintenance processes. The cortisol awakening response becomes blunted with age, weakening the body's natural morning brake on inflammatory processes precisely when joints are most vulnerable after overnight dehydration and reduced synovial fluid turnover. These age-related vulnerability factors do not operate in isolation but create a compounding effect where each compromised system amplifies the dysfunction of others. The combination of reduced antioxidant capacity, impaired digestion, metabolic dysfunction, structural joint deterioration, and immune dysregulation creates a perfect storm where dietary inflammatory triggers encounter a body primed for sustained inflammatory responses with limited recovery capacity. This explains why breakfast combinations that seemed harmless in younger years become potent drivers of chronic joint inflammation and progressive tissue damage in seniors, transforming morning meals from sources of nourishment into daily contributors to pain and disability. The compounding effect refers to the unique and dangerous way in which three common breakfast food categories, high sugar beverages, refined grains, and processed meats, interact within the body to create a joint-destroying inflammatory cascade that is far greater than the sum of their individual effects. Rather than causing simple additive inflammation, this combination triggers a synergistic and self-perpetuating cycle that can leave joints stiff, swollen, and damaged well beyond the morning hours, especially in seniors. The process begins almost immediately after consumption. High fructose sugars, often found in juices and sweetened breakfast items, are rapidly absorbed, leading to a spike in both blood glucose and uric acid. Elevated uric acid acts as an inflammatory primer, activating the NLRP3 inflammasome, a cellular complex in joint tissues that triggers the release of powerful pro-inflammatory messengers such as interleukin-1 beta, IL-1 beta. At the same time, the rapid rise in glucose, both from these sugars and from refined carbohydrates like white bread and pastries, accelerates the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. AGEs are sticky molecular byproducts that bind to proteins in joint cartilage and synovial tissue. When AGEs interact with their specific receptors on joint cells, they flip on genetic switches like the nuclear factor NF-kappa B that launch a broad inflammatory attack, releasing cytokines, for example, IL-6, TNF-alpha, and enzymes that degrade cartilage structure. The second wave of this inflammatory assault comes from refined grains, which prolong and intensify the effects initiated by sugars. Their rapid digestion keeps blood sugar elevated, fueling ongoing AGE production and oxidative stress. This environment further activates enzymes known as matrix metalloproteinases and ADAMPs, which physically break down the collagen and proteoglycans that provide joint cushioning and resilience. Into this already inflamed setting, processed breakfast meats introduce a third layer of harm. High sodium in these meats encourages fluid retention, leading to swelling and extra pressure within the joints. Nitrites and nitrates, often used as preservatives, are transformed during high heat cooking into reactive compounds like nitrosamines and heterocyclic amines, which further stoke inflammation. Heme iron in these meats catalyzes the production of free radicals, amplifying oxidative stress, while excess omega-6 fatty acids drive the creation of pro-inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes, lipid mediators that sustain pain and inflammation. What makes the compounding effect especially insidious is its duration. The inflammatory mediators generated by this breakfast combination do not dissipate quickly. AGEs and ALEs, advanced lipoxidation end products, persist in joint tissues for hours, keeping the inflammatory machinery activated. The sustained elevation of cytokines and lipid mediators means that joints remain bathed in pro-inflammatory signals long after breakfast is over, often for the entire morning or longer. Repeated daily consumption leads to a state where the body's natural anti-inflammatory mechanisms are overwhelmed and cannot restore balance. This effect is magnified in seniors due to several factors. Overnight, joints become dehydrated and synovial fluid thickens, making cartilage more brittle and less able to absorb shocks. The natural morning surge of cortisol, a hormone that ordinarily suppresses inflammation, is often blunted with age, lowering the body's ability to counteract dietary inflammatory triggers. Reduced nocturnal blood flow means that cartilage begins the day undernourished. Age-related declines in antioxidant reserves, increased insulin resistance, and greater gut permeability, allowing bacterial toxins to enter circulation, all converge to heightened sensitivity to this inflammatory barrage. With repeated exposure, the compounding effect becomes self-reinforcing. Chronic low-grade swelling DME turns persistent, pain pathways become hypersensitive, and the cellular machinery responsible for joint repair falters under continuous cytokine pressure. Over time, the accumulation of AGEs and related compounds causes permanent cross-linking and stiffening of cartilage. The body's defenses remain in a state of chronic alarm, and the capacity for overnight recovery is lost. This explains why many seniors experience not just transient morning stiffness, but a progressive decline in joint function, mobility, and comfort. By understanding the compounding effect, it becomes clear that these common breakfast combinations are not just innocent choices, but powerful, synergistic drivers of joint destruction, especially in the context of age-related vulnerabilities and the body's natural morning rhythms. Evidence-based solutions for combating breakfast-induced joint inflammation represent a convergence of nutritional science, clinical research, and practical implementation strategies that can measurably reverse inflammatory damage within weeks. These solutions operate through multiple complementary mechanisms, stabilizing blood glucose to prevent advanced glycation end product formation, providing specialized nutrients that actively resolve inflammation, supporting gut health to reduce systemic inflammatory burden, and supplying the raw materials necessary for joint tissue repair and maintenance. The cornerstone of joint protective breakfast nutrition involves replacing processed meats with high-quality proteins that provide essential amino acids for cartilage synthesis while avoiding inflammatory compounds. Clinical research demonstrates that consuming 25 to 30 grams of complete protein from sources like pasture-raised eggs, wild-caught fatty fish, or plant-based options produces measurable anti-inflammatory effects. Eggs prepared with minimal heat provide all essential amino acids, including glycine and proline, critical building blocks for collagen synthesis in joint cartilage. The bioavailability of these amino acids is enhanced when eggs are soft-boiled, poached, or gently scrambled rather than fried at high temperatures. Wild-caught salmon, sardines, and mackerel deliver concentrated omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, which research shows can reduce production of inflammatory prostaglandins by up to 40%, while increasing specialized pro-resolving mediators that actively clear existing inflammation from joint tissues. Plant-based proteins from hemp seeds, chia seeds, and quinoa provide additional benefits through their fiber content and phytonutrient profiles that support gut health and reduce systemic inflammatory burden. Greek yogurt and cottage cheese offer complete proteins along with probiotics that support the gut-joint axis, while collagen peptides specifically provide amino acids in ratios optimized for cartilage repair. Replacing refined grains with fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates represents one of the most powerful interventions for reducing breakfast-induced inflammation. Steel-cut oats, with their intact beta-glucan fiber structure, have been shown in clinical trials to reduce inflammatory markers by 15–20% when consumed regularly for 4 weeks. The soluble fiber forms a gel-like matrix that slows glucose absorption, preventing the rapid blood sugar elevations that trigger AGE formation and oxidative stress. Targeting 8 to 12 grams of fiber at breakfast through sources like steel-cut oats, quinoa, or sprouted grain products provides optimal glucose stabilization without digestive discomfort. Quinoa offers the unique advantage of being a complete protein alongside complex carbohydrates while containing quercetin, a flavonoid with documented cyclooxygenase inhibition properties similar to low-dose anti-inflammatory medications. Berries added to these whole grain bases provide additional fiber along with anthocyanins, compounds that research shows can reduce inflammatory cytokine production by 25-30% compared to refined grain equivalents. The key is choosing carbohydrates with a glycemic index below 55 and combining them with protein and healthy fats to further blunt glucose response. Strategic inclusion of anti-inflammatory fats transforms breakfast from an inflammatory trigger into a therapeutic intervention. Extra virgin olive oil contains oleocanthal, a phenolic compound with anti-inflammatory properties equivalent to low-dose ibuprofen, as demonstrated through cyclooxygenase enzyme inhibition studies. Consuming 1 to 2 tablespoons daily provides measurable anti-inflammatory effects while enhancing absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and phytonutrients. Avocados deliver monounsaturated fats alongside vitamin K2, which supports bone metabolism, and glutathione precursors that enhance cellular antioxidant capacity. Ground flax seeds provide alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, an omega-3 fatty acid that research shows can reduce inflammatory markers when consumed in amounts of 1 to 2 tablespoons daily. Walnuts offer both omega-3 seconds and polyphenols, with studies demonstrating that regular consumption can improve the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio and reduce C-reactive protein levels. The goal is achieving a total fat intake of 25% of breakfast calories from these anti-inflammatory sources while maintaining an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio below 4 to 1. Colorful fruits and vegetables provide polyphenols, flavonoids, and other bioactive compounds with documented anti-inflammatory and joint protective effects that work synergistically with macronutrients. Berries, particularly blueberries and tart cherries, contain anthocyanins that research shows can reduce inflammatory markers and improve joint mobility within 2 to 4 weeks of regular consumption. Tart cherry juice or concentrate provides additional benefits through its natural melatonin content and ability to reduce uric acid levels. Leafy greens like spinach and kale supply vitamin K2 for cartilage health, sulforaphane for cellular antioxidant pathway activation, and nitrates that support blood flow to joint tissues. Turmeric, with its active compound curcumin, has extensive research support for joint health, with studies showing anti-inflammatory effects comparable to NSAIDs when consumed with black pepper, piperine to enhance absorption. Fresh ginger provides gingerols and shogaols that inhibit inflammatory enzyme pathways, while green tea delivers EGCG, epigallocatech and gallate, that research demonstrates can inhibit cartilage-degrading enzymes while providing antioxidant protection. Proper hydration strategy begins before breakfast and continues throughout the morning to support synovial fluid production and nutrient transport to joint tissues. Consuming 16 to 20 ounces of filtered water immediately upon waking helps restore synovial fluid viscosity after overnight dehydration, when joints are naturally stiffest due to reduced circulation and fluid turnover. Adding a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar to morning water can reduce post-meal glucose spikes by 20-30% through improved insulin sensitivity. Green tea provides hydration along with EGCG and L-theanine, compounds that support both joint health and cognitive function during morning hours when cortisol levels are naturally elevated. The timing of anti-inflammatory nutrients matters significantly. Consuming them within the first hour of waking establishes a protective biochemical environment before joints experience mechanical stress from daily activities. This morning window represents a critical opportunity to shift inflammatory balance toward resolution rather than amplification. The most powerful anti-inflammatory effects emerge from strategic nutrient combinations that enhance bioavailability and create additive therapeutic benefits. Pairing omega-3 rich foods with antioxidant rich berries increases absorption and effectiveness of both nutrients through complementary cellular pathways. Combining protein with fiber-rich carbohydrates provides superior blood sugar stabilization compared to either macronutrient consumed alone, while adding healthy fats to antioxidant-rich foods increases absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and phytonutrients by up to 300%. Examples of synergistic combinations include steel-cut oats topped with blueberries, walnuts, and ground flaxseed, or a vegetable omelet cooked in olive oil with avocado and a side of berries. These combinations work through multiple pathways simultaneously, stabilizing glucose, providing anti-inflammatory compounds, supporting gut health, and supplying building blocks for tissue repair. Week 1 focuses on elimination and foundation building, remove all sources of refined sugars, processed grains, and processed meats while establishing the 25 to 35 gram protein target, 8 to 12 gram fiber goal, and 16 to 20 ounce morning hydration routine. Begin each day with water containing lemon or apple cider vinegar, followed by a balanced breakfast containing protein, complex carbohydrates, and healthy fats. Week 2 introduces enhancement and optimization through the addition of specific anti-inflammatory compounds, omega-3 sources daily, fatty fish twice weekly or ground flaxseed daily, 1 concentrated antioxidant source berries, green tea, or turmeric, and attention to cooking methods that minimize inflammatory compound formation. This progressive approach allows the digestive system to adapt while establishing sustainable habits that support long-term joint health. Research-based expectations for anti-inflammatory dietary interventions follow a predictable timeline that reflects the body's natural healing and adaptation processes. Within 72 hours, inflammatory markers in blood begin decreasing as the burden of dietary inflammatory triggers is reduced. Week 1 typically brings noticeable improvements in morning stiffness and joint comfort as AGE formation slows and oxidative stress decreases. Weeks 2 through 4 show progressive improvements in joint mobility and pain reduction as anti-inflammatory nutrients accumulate in tissues and cellular repair processes accelerate. By week 6, many individuals experience significant improvements in overall joint function, energy levels, and sleep quality as systemic inflammation resolves and the body's natural healing mechanisms regain optimal function. These timelines reflect the remarkable capacity of joint tissues to heal and regenerate when provided with appropriate nutritional support and freed from the daily inflammatory assault of problematic breakfast foods.